When it comes to promoting the use of diversity and inclusion data, I'm not the only one. You know what I don't hear people talking about? The reasons why your organization is afraid of this data. I'm Dr. Jonathan Ashong-Lamptey. I work with organizations to make them inclusive, and I'm on a mission to help 1 million people like you to make your workplace inclusive. Get your pen and paper ready because I'm going to give you 3 reasons why your organization is afraid of its own diversity and inclusion data. This is the 3rd and final part of a 3-part series about you and your diversity and inclusion data. In part 1, I made 3 suggestions to help you manage your data. In part 2, I shared 3 quick secrets to change the way that you approach it, even if you've got no data at all. In this episode, we're going to look at this from the perspective of the organization. And this is important because if we can't empathize, then we can't win. Organizations are afraid of some of the information that I'm sharing with you, but I think that's the wrong way to think about it. Why? Because I'm using an evidence-based approach to let you understand what's behind the metaphorical curtain. It's worth noting that the hidden assumption underneath everything I'm about to say is that organizations anticipate that their diversity and inclusion data is going to reveal bad news. And with that in mind, the first reason why your organization is afraid of its own diversity and inclusion data is that once the cat is out of the bag, they have to do something about it. Why? Because as Peter Drucker says, what gets measured gets managed. And this is why the gender pay reporting is so important in the UK, because now organizations have to manage it. It's public. Now, this means different things in different organizations. I know you understand that, but it's the same principle for any diversity and inclusion data. The organization, they can try and ignore it. They can try and bury it, or they'll be forced to manage it. And that's because that's what performance management is all about. You've heard me say this before. Once an organization has a performance indicator that doesn't meet acceptable standards, they're obliged to fix it. Organizations that don't, they're telling you that it's not an important performance indicator. Their legitimate fear comes from knowing that once they know that they're underperforming, as a performance-driven organization, you have to address it. And that takes resources, it takes time, it takes money. Now pretend you're a leader of an organization. Leaders are constantly being told that they need to provide resources for this, and they need to provide resources for that, and that everyone's need for resources is so important. One of the 3 biggest problems that organizations experience when they try to become inclusive is around performance. The business case for diversity. How does all of this make sense in your organization? When this isn't clear, it's just another potential cost center with no clear operational relevance. And who wants to be the person who brings that up to a senior leader? Hence the fear. Before we talk about the next reason, I want to talk about the importance of sharing. If you hear anything that you find interesting, then please share it with one other person that you think would find it useful. If you're finding this for the first time, make sure you check out the show notes. You can access these wherever you're listening to the podcast. The show notes have got details of all the reports and all the resources that are mentioned in the show. I've put this together for you so that you can go deeper into anything that we discuss here. Now let's get back to talking about your data. So far, I've told you that organizations are afraid of their diversity and inclusion data because if it's below acceptable standards, it will have to be fixed, and this will cost time and money. The second reason is that organizations are scared of the truth. And I mean a truth that they don't like. Take a second to think about this. How would you feel if someone could prove that you were less than a good friend? Or that you had serious shortfalls as a parent? Or you were somehow lacking as a spouse? Any one of these things would be tough if it was spelled out to you in a way that you couldn't wriggle out of. Now, it's not the same thing, but you get my point. This is kind of what's happening to organizations when they get their diversity and inclusion data. If you have evidence that shows that your organization appears to treat people in a way that isn't completely fair, where everyone doesn't share the same advantages, or everyone doesn't get to reach their potential, that's an ugly truth. And it may mean that the company isn't a meritocracy, and we all like to think that they are. Having this in black and white is uncomfortable, and it affects the way that the company looks at itself and its relationship with its employees. Now, some organizations would prefer not to know this. They put their head in the sand, because once you know this, it means that maybe some of the values, some of the beliefs that you talk about each and every day, they're not true, or you're falling short. Not only that, it also undermines the people who are doing well in these organizations. Sometimes people think of this as an attack on people who have worked hard to succeed. Because if we say that there are other people in the organization who have also worked hard, but they didn't get what they deserved, or they didn't get a fair shot, it undermines everyone within the organization. Can you see how deep this goes? It's not just about the data. The scale of this issue can be so much larger and so much more insidious than initially anticipated. And this leads me to the third and final reason why your organization may be afraid of its own diversity and inclusion data. And that is because they're intimidated by the scope of the task. If you're looking at your diversity and inclusion data and it needs work, it's hard to know where to start. Do you start with the people? Do you start with the policies? Do you have some sort of institutional problems that you need to address? The data is likely to suggest that there's a lot to do. And I get it. I speak with organizations about this all the time. It can be intimidating, especially because there's a lot of loud voices out there telling you that it's not good enough. You need to do better. And this can be really scary because you don't want to do the wrong thing or make it any worse. Remember, it's not just your organization. This is really common all over the world. Right now, I'm in Florida, and I've been discussing these issues with leaders of global organizations that you know. And the point being, the challenges that we face are relevant on both sides of the Atlantic. You are not alone. And this is why you've got people like me to help you. Even if I don't work with you directly, you know that each and every week I'm supporting you on your inclusion journey. And in a few weeks, I'll be entering my 3rd year of doing so on this podcast. That said, make no mistake, your organization is entitled to be concerned. But if you're listening to this, then you're as persistent, consistent, and motivated as I am. And that's what it's going to take. But the more we normalize these conversations, the more people we have thinking critically, the more likely we are to win. So let's wrap this up. What are the key messages here? 3 reasons why your organization may be afraid of your diversity and inclusion data. 1, once the cat's out of the bag, they have to do something about it. 2, some organizations are scared of the truth. And 3, they may be intimidated by the scope of the task. So what do you think? Does your organization have any of these fears? Get in touch or leave a message. I would love to hear from you. If you've learned something from today's show, you should sign up to our insider list. It's free and you can stay ahead of the pack and get the best of everything that I produce. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.